So here we are. We have declared ourselves to be a neutral nation, and this has angered those in the U.S. who felt we should have supported France, and it angered those in the U.S. who felt we should have supported Britain. It also has gone through and made Britain and France both a little unhappy with us. They were both irked, as your textbook says. And so we're going to start to see more and more difficulties arising on the high seas and on land, both with France and Britain. In regards to France, it's often referred to as the quasi war with France. Now, Britain, you're going to have to remember, still had a number of posts on the frontier, places like Detroit, for example. And while they are there, according to the British, to ensure that the United States fulfilled its obligations under the Treaty of Paris, one of the things that they're doing is supplying the Indians with arms. Okay, the British are still quite content to stir things up, to push the various native tribes to go up against the Americans, to do raiding parties, to attack settlements, etc., all these different things. Again, with the hope that the newly created United States will fracture and that this will give an advantage back to Britain. Now, in the Ohio country, there is going to be a battle at a place called Fallen Timbers. It's going to be led by a general known as Mad Anthony Wayne. Okay. Now, Mad Anthony Wayne is going to take a force, and they're going to basically be fighting against a coalition, for lack of a better term. There's going to be, it's mostly Native Americans, but you can throw into that some British, some French, even I've read some disaffected Americans who weren't very happy. And they're going to end up pushing the Native Americans back up literally to the gates of a British fort that refused to let them in. General Wayne was more interested in letting the vast majority of the Indians go and then dealing specifically with the chiefs. And what had happened was, with the loss of face from having lost the battle, the chiefs were more willing to sign a treaty, which is known as the Treaty of Greenville. This was in 1795. The treaty had the Indians ceding or giving up a huge tract of land in the Ohio country. Remember, there had been a large number of American pioneers who had crossed the Appalachians and they were moving into the Ohio country. And the more folks you had crossing into this area of these native ancestral lands, the more friction you're starting to see between the settlers and the Native Americans. Plus, like I said, you add to that the fact that Britain was arming and encouraging the Native Americans, you're going to see, a lot of problems arise. So, after the Battle of Fallen Timbers, the Treaty of Greenville is actually signed, and it's here that for the first time, really, we discover, we get the proof necessary that Britain has been supplying guns to the Indians. And naturally, that's going to enrage Americans all over again. So you have this plan of neutrality is really being hammered from a number of sources at this point in time. You have the issue of France and problems that we're having with them on the high seas. You have the problem with the English and the British are supplying weapons and then encouraging attacks. So we're trying to be neutral, and yet it seems like everything is, for lack of a better term, conspiring against that neutrality to try and drag us into battle on either one side or the other. And the fact that Britain is supplying weapons does not help very much. Now, completely ignoring American neutrality, okay, we're going to talk about the high seas for a moment. We're going to talk about the Royal Navy. Now, you might recall when we spoke about the Royal Navy during the Revolution, this is one of the most modern navies at the time. It is one of the best armed and largest navies on the planet, and they really can do almost anything they want, especially to a nation such as ourselves, because we had such limited strength. We had such a limited, concept of a navy for ourselves. So the British are going to completely ignore our neutrality, and you're going to have the commanders of various Royal Navy vessels are going to seize approximately 300 American merchant ships. All right, they're going to essentially pull up alongside. They're going to order the captain of a merchant ship to, the phrase is heave to, so they would have to stop. They would be boarded by the British. The Royal Navy would then inspect the cargo and everything, sometimes taking stuff. And this is in complete violation of what's referred to as freedom of the sea. And this could easily be construed because it would be an act of war. But the worst part about this is something called impressment. They're going to impress a large number of American seamen into the Royal Navy. Now, they're going to use the argument that really what they're doing is getting deserters from the Royal Navy back into service. Remember, this is a point in time where quite literally you didn't have any kind of ID. I've even read stories about the fact that in some cases, um, some of the different sailors and whatnot were using various tattoos they had to try and prove who they were or who they weren't, I guess is also a good way to phrase it. So you're seeing a large number of sailors being impressed into service with the Royal Navy. I put Army up there. I apologize for that. Yeah, it's into the Royal Navy. And again, we have the British supplying weapons to the Indians. We have the British now kidnapping Americans and forcing them into the military. So again, you're seeing all sorts of things conspiring against this ability for us to remain neutral. In fact, you have a lot of the JDRs, the Jeffersonian Democratic Republicans, crying for war against England. Okay? Now, I've mentioned this before. The only reason that we beat England in the Revolution was the fact that we had help from other sources. So to argue that we needed an all out war with England, that's not going to make a whole lot of sense because we're not going to have the ability to really go after them. We don't have much in terms of an army. Now, we have up here, it says, or at least an embargo. Again, that's going to be very difficult to do. The only embargo we could do would be to refuse to buy stuff from England or stop selling our stuff to England. It's not like we had the Navy or the ability to actually go out and stop their ships. Again, like with Citizen Genet, we do have that concept of privateers, but that's about it. Well, the JDR's demand for, at the very least, an embargo was met with a refusal by President Washington. He understood that given the fact the vast majority of our trade was back and forth between ourselves and either Britain directly or her colonies, that this would destroy the financial system that we've only just started to get into place. And without a solid financial base, there was again that specter of anarchy, that possibility that things would not go well and we could end up going right back down the path that we had been under the Articles. So even though you do have demands for war with Britain, Washington is going to remain on the same path he had been. He's going to keep the United States neutral. He's not going to risk our future by giving in to the passion of the crowd at the moment.